Still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful? Rose bellowed along with the song while spinning in a dance with Wei, short for Wade. Of course I will, Wei grinned, spinning Rose back to him. Wei came from a prominent family, and Rose was simply the manager of hotel maids. She worked at the most prestigious hotel in the area. Many elites visited the hotel that Rose worked at. Wei's family was one of them. I love you, Rose, Wei whispered in her ear as they sat on a bench in the hotel gardens one day. I love you more, Rose replied as they snuggled and kissed. Though he was only 17 at the time, Wei knew that Rose was going to be his one day. Unfortunately for him, though, his parents would never allow Wei to settle for a hotel maid, even if she was the manager. Rose overheard his mother saying just that one night to Wei as she stood outside of his Skyline suite doors. Rose fled in tears before Wei could answer her knock. He grabbed his coat to try to run after Rose, but his mother stopped him, reminding Wei that he was expected to focus on college. She even threatened to cut him off if he proceeded after Rose. So Wei stayed put and closed the door behind him. 6 years later, Wei would find himself married with a child. He didn't love his wife in the way he had loved Rose. In fact, Sarah, Wei's wife, was the one he had settled for. They lived in a massive mansion on the beach waterfront, just next door to where the hotel used to exist. Now it was a huge empty building. Still, Wei owned the mansion next to it, as well as an apartment downtown. After a year of vacancy, though, someone would buy the old hotel. Rather than turning that hotel into another, it was turned into a beautiful, magnificent mansion. The mysterious owner of the mansion would throw extravagant parties. Elites and all the high-end people were invited each weekend, even Wei and his wife. However, Wei's wife Sarah had enough with all the noise that came from such parties. Every Friday and Saturday night, Wei, Sarah, and their 7-year-old child would be woken up by a sudden boom of fireworks, or the noise of hundreds cheering at once. Finally, Sarah had enough. She ordered Wei to go take care of it. So, with sleepy eyes and only a beater and pajama pants, Wei put on his slippers and headed outside. He passed the line of palm trees that stood as a barricade next to their cement privacy wall, dividing the two properties. Wei followed the path in between mansions, back toward the beach. When he finally reached sand, the wall ended, and Wei went around to the other side, which used to be hotel property. Now there was an elevated deck, with a massive in-ground pool, and a dock that went all the way out on the ocean. At the end of the dock was a bright red light, something else Sarah had complained about. Swiftly, Wei made his way through the crowds of people, occasionally stopping to ask if he could talk to the owner of the place. It seemed to be a mystery. Even the mayor was there, enjoying the party, surprisingly to Wei. But finally, he ran into someone he recognized. It was Rose's cousin, Rick. After many how have you beens and catching up, Wei began to ask about Rose. He had forgotten why he was there to begin with. Rick gestured for Wei to follow him as they made their way inside and up a grand staircase. It was a bit quieter on the second floor, but then they took an elevator up to the top floor, where it seemed to be completely silent. Wei found that odd, as they could hear everything from his mansion next door. As he waited on a chair in the hallway, outside of some giant double doors, Wei remembered why he was there just then. Rick came back out from the double doors by himself and explained to Wei that his request to turn the noise down was accepted. Wei was confused, mainly because he never outwardly voiced his noise level concerns. Still, Wei thanked Rick. Then Rick asked Wei to come back over the next day at noon as an apology for the disturbances was there. By the time Wei got back down to the ground floor with Rick, the partygoers were gone. All that was left were butlers, maids, and a huge mess. The noise, however, was gone. Wei went back over to his mansion to find Sarah and their son sleeping peacefully. Though he laid back down, he could barely sleep. What would tomorrow be like? He thought. Would he finally meet the mysterious owner of the mansion that used to be a hotel? The same hotel that he and Rose fell in love with one another in years prior. The next day, Wei decided not to tell Sarah about his invitation at noon. He thought it best to scope the owner out before bringing Sarah along. Plus, there could be harsh words between Wei and the owner. This time, Wei went the front way. After knocking on the double doors to the front of the giant building, now a mansion, a butler led him inside. Wei was surprised to find everything in perfect order from last night. It looked as if there had never been a party at all. As Wei sat waiting in a comfy chair, he could hear Rick's voice from upstairs. It sounded like he was convincing someone to come downstairs with him. It almost sounded like he was arguing with a woman. Then, he saw her. It was Rose. She was still so beautiful, only this time, instead of wearing a maid's uniform, she was dressed in expensive clothing. Wei stood up, his heart pounding, as Rick, with a shy Rose on his arm, made their way down the steps. Once they were face to face, it seemed as though Wei and Rose got lost in each other, as eyes for a brief moment.
Shaggy hair was there. Rose began speaking first, saying, "I hope you don't think I overdid it." Wei smiled, brushed a piece of hair behind Rose's ear, and replied, "You could never. But how did you—" Rose knew what he was trying to ask. "How did I become so rich?" She finished for him. Wei nodded his head. Rose took him by the hand and led him into a huge family room with a giant fireplace. Rick left them alone for the time being, as they both sat a few inches apart on Rose's stunning furniture. Rose told Wei about how her boss, the owner of the hotel, had passed away without any family or offspring to give his large inheritance to, so he gave it to Rose. She was more shocked than anyone. At first, she didn't know what to do with the hotel, and she felt guilty at even the thought of selling it. Then, she heard that Wei had moved into the mansion next door, and she was no longer a lowly servant. "You were never a lowly servant to me, Rose," Wei said. "I only let you run off that day because my mother was threatening my future. And I've hated myself for it every single day." Rose and Wei were now face to face, nose to nose, and almost lip to lip. Before they could kiss, though, Wei suddenly remembered he was a married man and a father. "Rose, I can't," Wei said reluctantly. "I know," Rose replied. "I found out the day I came back. I had asked Rick to go over to your home and see if you'd remember me. Instead, he saw you helping your wife and child out of the car." Rose gulped, then started again. "I started throwing parties first in hopes of aggravating you enough to move. But then you came over last night just yourself in your beater and pajama pants, and I just had to talk to you one more time." Tears filled Rose's eyes as she turned away from Wei. Wei put his hands on Rose's waist and turned her toward him again. Before they knew it, they were both inches apart again. The same hypnotic feelings from 4 years ago came crashing down like a tidal wave as Rose traced her finger down Wei's chest. She could feel his desires pouring over her as her body tingled and ached for him. Wei latched his lips onto Rose's neck as if it were a deterrent from meeting her lips, because he knew that would be the final straw. Sure enough, his lips moved upward until he caught her lips. Then began an intense and passionate kissing moment. When Rick entered the family room, all he saw were Wei and Rose's clothes strewn across the floor, in a trail leading to the elevator. Afterward, as they lay in Rose's messy bedsheets, Wei held Rose in his arms as she rested her head on his chest. It felt as if no time had passed between them. Shaggy hair was there. Both Wei and Rose would have done anything to make that moment last forever. Unfortunately, it couldn't. Soon, Wei's cell phone began ringing back to back. He knew he had messed up. Sarah was still at home, waiting for Wei to return with the news that the owner of that mansion would no longer throw parties. Instead, he was laying in her bed. I have to go," Wei exclaimed nervously, kissing Rose once more, from her lips to her neck, then her shoulder, and down her arm. "Will you be back?" Rose eagerly asked. Wei searched Rose's face, full of desperation, and replied, "Yes, my love. I will be back soon." With that, he was on his way home, prepared with an excuse. Yet when he came back to his home, instead of finding his wife, he found the nanny. "Hilda, I thought you had off today." Wei stayed, a look of confusion on his face. "Yes, but Mrs. Rogers had an emergency and offered me a bonus," Hilda retorted. "She tried to call you, but no answer. I'll still get my bonus, won't I?" Wei assured her she would, checked in on his son, then tried to call his wife Sarah. No answer. Wei wondered what the emergency could possibly have been. After a few hours, Sarah came home looking quite frazzled. Her hair looked as messy as when she first woke up that morning. Normally, Sarah would come right over to Wei for a kiss, but this time she didn't. Instead, she said she was going to shower and ran up the stairs. Wei followed after her, demanding to know what the emergency was about. As Sarah was showering, Wei sat on a stool, awaiting her explanation. "I realized our son was out of his favorite cookies, so I went to the store, but I couldn't find them. I went on a search for them all day and left my phone in the car." Wei found her explanation hard to believe. But Sarah had never acted this way before, so he let it go. The next day, Monday, Wei typically worked from home. But this time he told Sarah he had to go to a meeting. Normally, Sarah would have begged Wei to stay home or thought it suspicious. Instead, she gave Wei a kiss and told him to have a good day. After he left the house, Wei drove his car a few blocks away, then walked back toward Rose's mansion. As soon as he rounded the corner to Rose's property, he hopped over the gate and walked up to ring the doorbell. Instead of the butler, Rose answered the door with a big smile across her face. "You just missed Rick. He just left," she exclaimed. After that, there wasn't much talking. The pair headed down to Rose's underground bunker, equipped with a bar, a pool table, a sauna, a jacuzzi, and a lounge. It was all they needed to have a good time together in privacy, and that they did. In fact, Wei was having too much fun. When he finally looked at the time, it was well past 5 p.m. Dreadfully, Wei looked at his phone to see how many times Sarah called, but to his surprise, she had not called even once. Wei found it to be odd, but Rose assured him that she was probably just napping or something. Wei would have cared more, but he had Rose, the love of his life, in his grasps. Rose and Wei both felt the mutual feeling that their love could be short-lived once again, so they savored every moment together. When Wei finally did leave Rose's mansion, he left out the back way. His car was still a few blocks away, so he figured going the beachfront way would save him time. As soon as Wei was about to round the corner, though, he caught a glimpse of someone climbing over the opposite wall that divided his property from Rose's property. It was still daylight out, so Wei could clearly see that it was Rick, Rose's cousin, climbing over into Rose's yard from Wei's yard. For a second, Wei thought about going over to ask Rick what he was doing, but he wasn't trying to waste any more daylight before getting his car and going home. When Wei finally did get home, Sarah had dinner waiting for him. Wei decided to take a risk and ask Sarah if she knew Rick. Sarah wasn't from that area originally, so the answer should have been no. Instead, Sarah explained that Rick had come over one day to look for Wei and introduced himself. If it weren't for Wei's recent entanglement with Rose, he might have spent more time looking into why Sarah seemed to suddenly be moving differently. Instead, he went upstairs to shower and went to bed. Sarah was there. The next day, Sarah woke Wei up excited about something. "We're going to lunch with the neighbors, Rick and Rose." "You didn't tell me you went way back with Rick?" Sarah exclaimed, opening the blinds to let in sunshine, feeling bombarded with too much information first thing in the morning. Wei just nodded his head, sleepily wiping at his eyes. Then what Sarah said had finally caught up to him. "Wait, how do you know that I know Rick? And when did he invite you to lunch?" Sarah seemed caught off guard for a moment, then nonchalantly replied, "He called over here this morning. I thought you gave them our number." Wei didn't remember giving Rick his number, though he might have given it to Rose at some point, so he let it go. Later that afternoon, Wei and Sarah sat at a small square dining table, while Rose sat across from Sarah and Rick across from Wei. Wei felt quite awkward being out to eat with his wife and his mistress. Still, it didn't stop him from playing footsies with Rose underneath the table. After the food came out, Rick began saying some nonsensical things, according to Wei. He kept talking about major changes, and needing to be brave about those changes. It even seemed like he was looking at Sarah every time he spoke. Sarah, on the other hand, looked bashfully from her food to Rick, then back to her food again every time Rick spoke. Sometimes we must realize and admit when we had it wrong to begin with, and know when to throw in the towel, don't you agree, Wei? Wei turned his attention to Rick, suddenly feeling as though he were speaking to him personally. "What is all this about Rick?" Wei asked as Rick further stared at Sarah. Rose realized just then that Wei had abruptly stopped playing footsies with her under the table. "What I mean is," Rick wipes his mouth with a napkin, before looking directly at Wei and continuing. "Sarah has something to tell you." Wei slammed his hand down on the table, making Sarah jump. Then Rose put her hand gently on Wei to calm him down, forgetting where they were. Sarah immediately took notice and glared at Rose. Rose took her hand away as quickly as she had touched Wei, but the damage was done. Rick suddenly looked devious, stating, "Go on, Wei. Why don't you tell Sarah your own truth?" Wei suddenly remembered that Rick knew all too well about him and Rose's rendezvous. "Oh, I see," Wei retorted. "You found the perfect opportunity to steal my wife as soon as I was busy." "Busy doing what exactly?" Sarah exclaimed. Rose and Wei glanced at each other for a moment, until Rick interrupted. "I didn't take any opportunity. Your wife came knocking at my door and I decided to play cover for you. It's not my fault we fell in love in the process." "In love?" Wei shouted, forgetting they were in a diner. Rick stood up, replying, "Yes, Sarah and I are in love." He tried to take Sarah's hand, but she resisted. Wei stood to be eye level with Rick. "Don't you ever try to touch my wife again," Wei yelled angrily. "Then don't touch my cousin anymore either," Rick shouted back. Rose stood up then, saying, "Enough!" Before anything else could be said, the manager of the diner came over and asked the four of them to leave. 2 by 2, they did just that. Outside of the diner, Sarah looked at Wei and sternly let him know that she would be riding home with Rick, since Wei seemed to be so into Rose. Without argument, partly out of rage, Wei took Rose by the hand and helped her into the car like a gentleman. Seeing this, Rick mimicked Wei by gently helping Sarah into his car, though she didn't imagine it going down like that. Rose was kind of glad her cousin had gotten involved with Sarah, because it freed Wei up some. On their drive home, Rose asked Wei, "Do you still love her?" Wei didn't want to lie to Rose, but he could tell by her face that she was hoping he'd say no. "I haven't truly loved anyone since you, my love," Wei replied. Rose blushed, but deep down she knew better. She saw the rage that came over Wei when he figured out about Sarah and Rick. And she noticed how quickly Wei had stopped playing footsies with her to turn his attention onto Sarah. Still, she waited too long for a moment like that, when her and Wei could be hand in hand, driving down the road together. She was finally good enough for Wei, and finally rich enough for his family. But just then it dawned on Rose there. She still wouldn't get the respect she so desperately wanted from Wei's family. First it was because she was a poor maid, and now she, along with her cousin Rick, had wrecked Wei's picture-perfect family. Once they were home, Rose kissed Wei for a long time, inside Wei's car. She had a feeling about what was to come. Wei led Rose to her door, kissed her again, then let her know that he had to go home for his son's sake. Rose understood, but she wasn't going to give up that easily. When Wei entered his house, he was surprised to see Sarah sitting alone in their family room. Her face was red from crying. Wei quietly sat beside her. "How did we let this happen?" Sarah said between sniffles. "I'm not sure," Wei replied. "But I want to be honest with you, Sarah. Rose was my first love." Sarah looked into Wei's eyes and said, "Do you still love her?" He swallowed a lump in his throat, then replied, "I thought I did. But then when I saw you with Rick, all of that went down the drain. I guess I just needed to remember how much you really mean to me." Sarah leaned into Wei's lap as he brushed his fingers through her hair. "Do you really love Rick?" Wei asked, dreading the answer. Sarah sat up again, looked Wei in the eyes, and shook her head. "No." "I think I was just bored," Sarah confessed. Surprisingly, Wei took it well. "We definitely need to find ways to keep our marriage spicy," he said. After that, Rick left town once he realized Sarah was done with him. Hair was there. Rose stayed in her mansion, no longer throwing parties, but instead waiting patiently for Wei to come back to her again. She had secretly sent a note via her butler over to Wei's residence, with instructions to hand it directly to Wei. In the note, Rose gave Wei until 5 p.m. the next day to come over to her mansion and confess his love to her. Basically, she was saying, "It's her or me, take your pick." The next day, Rose swam inside her pool, facing the ocean, and as the sun got ready to set, Rose kept her eye on the red light at the end of her dock. She had given her staff a day off and left, the front door unlocked in hopes that Wei would come profess his love to her. Unfortunately, the time read 4:45 p.m. He had all day to come, but Rose was sure he was just waiting till the last minute. At any time, Wei was going to come walking through the glass doors which led out to her pool deck, and he was going to wrap his arms around Rose and tell her how he can be without her. After all, she had waited 4 long years for this. Rose put her elbows on the edge of the pool and let the rest of her body float as she continued staring at that red light. Then she checked the time on her cell phone one last time, 4:58 p.m. Suddenly she heard it, the glorious sound of her glass doors sliding open. She continued looking toward the ocean and that red dock light. As she heard the love of her life, Wei come closer behind her. Just then, as the clock hit 5 p.m., what she expected to be Wei's hands over her eyes instead felt like a cold, circular piece of iron up against her skull. After that, the lights went out. Rose had been taken out by a murderer,